and see so many people. I've been very involved with this debate, actually for many years. I started in the Ministry of Agriculture at 16 years of age, worked through all the initial culls that were undertaken in the 1990s, spent my career then going into the food industry through foot and mouth and then to work in crop protection and plant science. Up to a year ago, I suppose I was part of the agricultural establishment, worked with people like Peter Kendall and Jim Pace and others that were the architects of this cull policy. I've also been chairman of Care for the Wild for many years, and I sit on the council of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons Veterinary Nurses Committee, and I have a great interest obviously in wildlife conservation and animal welfare. The last year of my life, getting increasingly angry about the NFU policy on this issue, I've spent really campaigning on this more than anything else I've ever done. And it's been great to see so many people up and down this country that feel the same way I do, that this policy has no justification for animal welfare, no justification for economic or scientific grounds. It's got more holes than a Swiss cheese, and to be honest with you, I've never seen an agricultural farm policy like this, as bad as this, in the last 30 years in my time in government and industry. And it was interesting, we had a speech given by a leading academic, Christine Donnelly at Cambridge University on Wednesday. Not many of you will have heard about that, but she's been one of the key architects to a degree of the policy this government is going forward with on culling. And she made some interesting statements that will be covered in some detail in the Sunday Times tomorrow, so it's worth reading. But one of the key things she said was that there is no doubt in the minds of leading scientists now that badgers got TB from cattle. Okay, so let's be clear about that. 1971 was the first case, and since then, with the industrialization of the dairy and livestock industry, with moving more animals around in the way we are with poor biosecurity, we have increased the reservoir of disease in badgers. There is no doubt about that at all. And in many ways, that changes the nature of this debate, because up to this point, it's always been the farmers telling us, actually, we've got a huge problem, you've got to help us deal with it. You've got to be sympathetic to us, we've got to kill badgers. Sorry, let's hold on here a minute. You, through your methods and through your practices, have actually polluted our wildlife. You've inflicted on our wildlife a disease. And now you're telling us you want to actually get our taxpayers' money to kill our wildlife. So what happened to the polluters pays principle? And let's have a look at that biosecurity issue for a minute. We move 13 million cattle on average a year in this country, more than anywhere else in Europe. And we do not have decent enforcement rules in place to stop people breaking the law, to stop them tampering with passports and ear tags, to stop them moving cattle, actually TB reactors, and selling them. We have had over 78 million cattle movements in Britain in the last 6 years. Do you know how many investigations we've had? 24. Do you know how many prosecutions that's led to? 11. Okay, so if you're a farmer and you want to bend the rules, you are not going to get caught for it. Okay, we can move these cattle around, they can move them, and they are, and they're causing a worse situation. Now, if you look at the rates of TB in this country, something you must take into account, which the government have been trying to hide, and so have the NFU, and I lived through this, so I know what happened. Before 2001, the level of TB in cattle was quite low. Okay, it was at a manageable level and low compared to most countries in Europe. Suddenly it spiked after 2001. Why was that? Because we had foot and mouth in this country. Okay, we destroyed most of the national herd as a result of foot and mouth because the government under Tony Blair, and I was working in government at the time, wanted to vaccinate cattle, but the National Farmers Union forced his hand and said, no, if you vaccinate, we'll lose exports to Europe for our meat and dairy products, so you'll have to kill the herd. So we destroyed the herd. We killed millions of cattle, millions of sheep. We spent £8 million compensating farmers, and also the cost to losing the countryside for months through effectively closing it down. And then the National Farmers Union came back, Ben Gill, and said we've got to restock cattle. And the only place we didn't have foot and mouth was the southwest, so we're going to start bringing them in from there. And the chief veterinary officer and others said, well, hold on a minute, quite all of those cattle can have TB, we're going to have to put in some testing systems. The NFU said, no, we need those cattle in now. So we didn't have any testing systems. We moved them into the northwest, the East Midlands, throughout the country. Within 18 months, you trebled the rate of TB, and that's there for you to see in DEFRA figures, and you put that into the badger community. So that's where the problem lies. That's the direct result of National Farmers Union policy, direct result of farming industry practices as well. And let's be clear about this. Farmers are not doing enough at the farm gate level. They can do more to stop the interaction of badgers and cattle. They can put in gates, they can put in fences, they can tighten biosecurity, but they're not doing it. And that is wrong. And this whole policy is built on those 3 pillars of sand that I recently spoke about and wrote in an article. Negligence, incompetence, and deceit. The negligence because you're not dealing with the biosecurity. The incompetence because the way that you're killing these animals. In the past, if we had any culls, in the randomised badger cull and other research that we did, we used government officials to carry out this work. What Owen Patterson in his wisdom has done is contracted out the killing. to what you know are the lampers and the local pest controllers who are out there with the bouncers that the NFU has employed to follow them around to kill our wildlife. No one is monitoring that. We checked with DEFRA, we asked for figures, they told us we might have 4, we might have 6 people on the ground in Gloucestershire and Somerset, but only have 2 at any one time. You've got more chance of seeing a UN's weapon inspector sitting in Damascus having coffee at the moment than you are of finding a DEFRA monitor on the ground in Gloucestershire or Somerset. Let's be clear about that. And that's important, because the free shooting of badgers is the worst, cruelest possible method of killing these animals. We know by shooting them at night, these small muscular animals, that many of them are going to get wounded. We know many of them are going to die, long, painful deaths as a result. And we know that many could move around and spread the disease, which is the exact opposite of what this cull is about. Now, you could have cage-trapped these animals. You could have done it in a much more humane way, but it was costly, and the farming industry didn't want to pay for it. So this is killing on the cheap. So let's not think anything else other than that. And the other lie, the great lie that government have been telling, is that this was a scientific study. It's not a scientific study. It's about how many animals we can kill in 6 weeks, and I think they're struggling out there to hit their targets, but that's what it's about. There is no testing of these badgers. Not one of these badgers will be tested for TB, yet we know through new DNA research that we could understand more if we were testing them about the strain of TB and how it might move from the badgers to cattle. Invaluable information for everyone. I also know that the National Farmers Union have been having meetings with government about that. I also know that DEFRA have been advising ministers that they should test these animals, but the politicians have been running scared. Why is that? Because Owen Paterson knows that the randomised badger cull gave us figures. It gave us an overall disease rate in badgers of 16%. But those badgers generally were not showing negative symptoms for their health. They would live their lives without dying a painful death because they had TB. Only 1% of those animals in the randomised badger cull, 11,000 were killed in that survey, actually had late-stage TB, where it was impacting upon their health. Only 1%. They're the excretors that Owen Paterson keeps talking about. But when he was talking with me on Ian Dale on LBC a week ago, he was saying that we're 40% of badgers fall into that category. Utter lies and misleading people. And that's the deceit behind this as well. And when I say deceit, I mean it, okay? Because these guys have been hiding figures. We know since January the European Commission have put in tighter mechanisms for TB controls and biosecurity. They forced the harm of the British government and farmers, and they were screaming and shouting about it. But they said, you've got to get on top of this. EC money is coming in to compensate you. We want to see better biosecurity measures. We know in New Zealand, Australia, and other places this made a difference. Since January, those measures have gone in, and we've seen nearly a 3% drop between January and May in the TB rates in cattle in this country. Now, it's only charities like Care for the Wild that have been putting that information out. DEFRA have been putting press releases out, ministerial statements, and don't mention it. The National Farmers Union are so scared that they're only mentioning figures from December back. They don't want to talk about the last 5 or 6 months because it takes away the justification for this crazy badger cull. And that's what this is all about. It's about deceit. It's about misleading people. A few months ago, we worked on a story that ended up on the front page of the Sunday Times, thanks to Rupert Murdoch. But basically what we got was a story telling you that farmers sell TB meat into the food chain. Most of the media have been writing that all those cattle had been destroyed and incinerated. They weren't. 30,000 TB reactors went into food last year, into schools and hospitals and our armed forces. We've probably eaten 200,000 TB cows over the last 6 or 7 years. You're eating more TB meat, if you're a meat eater in this audience, than anywhere else in the Western developed world. And we're not certain what the health risk is of that, because we only know 50% of the sources of TB infection in this country, even though it's at record high, nearly 12,000 people last year. If you're eating undercooked rare meat, there could be a very small risk. The Food Standards Agency don't want to label it, and there's no traceability in the system, and Paterson cannot afford to lose that trade because it brings in over £10 million to pay towards the slaughter cost. A complete vicious circle. Every TB cow has to be sold. Every TB cow is then basically sending money back into the system from government flogging the food to us. And we pay twice. We pay for the slaughter cost through our taxpayers' money, and then we buy the meat and we don't even think it's TB meat. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And now we have what we've seen over the last 2 weeks. The best of British people coming out up and down this country, and I've been talking to them. I'm talking here to you. I was with the groups in Northampton. I'm in Bedford on Monday talking to similar groups. We've been talking to the media, all the national and regional media, and the dirty secrets of the farming industry are now coming out in a way that they never expected. The fact of the matter is that this cull is not justifiable. It will not make the situation worse. It might well make a bad situation much worse than it is today. And it's cruel and it's unnecessary. And all of us, I know, feel that in our hearts. And I think millions of people up and down this country feel that as well. And remember that the wildlife conservation compassionate movement in this country is a powerful political force. There's nearly 1 million people in the Wildlife Trust in this country. There are 2 million plus people in the RSPB. There are over 4 million in the National Trust. Together, we are bigger than the farming unions, we're bigger than the political parties, we're bigger than the industries that are trying to destroy wildlife. This is one of the most powerful movements in Britain, and it's getting stronger by the day. And the politicians will have to wake up to the fact that farmers don't have a right to destroy our wildlife. All of us here have a stake in our wildlife for our children's sake, and we will stand up and we will protect it. And this is not just about badgers. It's about buzzards. It's about bees. It's about our marine nature reserves. It's about hares. It's about all the animals that we care for that are threatened every day because certain industries want to take action that might hurt them, inflict them, or kill them. And we have to make a stand, and we must make some value statement about these animals, because the one thing Patterson really struggled with last week was when people asked him, what value do you put on a badger? And he just couldn't give you an answer, because he doesn't put any value on a badger at all. It's as simple as that. To him, a dead badger is just one more rung up the greasy pole of politics to get the job done, and that's just not good enough. So what do we do? Because it's easy for us to sit here and preach and say this is wrong. I know the farming industry. I do have sympathy for many farmers. You're not making a lot of money in dairy and livestock. It's a tough industry. But there are some people responsible that, for us, all of us to a degree, because we eat cheap food, we've got to think about the consequences of that. All the food retailers that run away from this issue. What I would like to see is one of the food retailers, like the Co-op, that has its own farm, for example, actually say to its farmers, listen, we'll pay you a bit more for your milk if you put in biosecurity measures to stop TB transmission on your farm. If you actually work with the Wildlife Trust to vaccinate badgers, we will then put product in the store which actually is badger and cattle friendly, and we will sell it at a premium. And you know what? People would buy it. And if the Co-op or Waitrose did it, the other retailers would follow it as well. And we move away from this crazy culling policy. In the next few weeks, we're going to see a big debate about the next steps on this. What I think we're going to find is that many of these gunmen out there are not going to meet their targets. They're going to come back well below that 5,300 plus figure. But then the government are going to say, well, it was just a difficult process of killing these animals, but we still need to kill them. They'll be talking about gassing and other options going forward. And we're going to have to fight this. There's an early day motion in the House of Commons now, about 150 MPs have signed it already, saying that you're not going to go just from this pilot directly to a national cull, that we need a proper debate about this, we need to consider the implications of this for our wildlife, and everyone has a stake in that. I think the 300,000 plus people that have signed that petition are a huge contributor to that debate as well. I think the media are wising up now that this is not a black and white debate, be it about badgers. There are lots of issues here that need to be looked at. The science is wrong, the animal welfare issues are wrong, and we have a very, very strong case to say this is not the best way to deal with it. Badger vaccination can work. We're all working hard on making it work. There are thousands of volunteers in this country that will go out with vaccinators to do it. We're not that far away from an oral vaccine for badgers as well, which is going to be a major step forward. And we will get cattle vaccines. And the one point I want to mention on cattle vaccines, ask yourself this: why has the National Farmers Union never had a major march, never had a major demonstration or lobbying exercise calling for cattle vaccines? Well, I'll tell you, there are many people in the NFU and the leadership of the farming industry and in government that are concerned about using cattle vaccines because they will lose export markets. Even if they get an approval in Europe, they might lose China. China's the big market that they're all after. That's where Patterson has been in the last 12 months. That's where Kendall has been as well. They know that's where they want to keep selling to. But I will say this: it's not good enough to kill British badgers so that we can sell dried milk to Chinese. That's not the way to do things. We will have to sort out the international arrangements on these export issues. We might lose a market to China for a while, but it'll be worth it if we can protect our wildlife. That's something that we should do. Next few weeks, please keep up what you're doing. I know it's going to be raining. I know it's going to be difficult. Keep going out there on the wounded badger patrols. It makes me so angry that the local police are spending maybe £2,000 an hour on helicopters to fly over wounded badger patrols for people from the Rotary Club and the WI and doctors and nurses and professionals that you all are, who are out there for the best reasons. We'd best spend that money vaccinating badgers, and that's something that we need to keep pushing ahead with. One thing to finish with: people often ask me, are you a bit eccentric, Dominic? Have you gone a bit crazy with all this animal stuff? And I often say to them, listen, there's something that's very special about British people. We're very compassionate and caring about wildlife. We're compassionate about our dogs and our cats and about the wildlife around us. Oh, in Patterson, that makes us different to the people you talk to in New Zealand or in France or in Germany or the United States. That's why the RSPCA started here. That's why the Vegan and Vegetarian Society started here. That's why Compassion in World Farming started here. People coming together. That's why in one town, in Horsham, 40 years ago, A number of people, Will Travers, Virginia McKenna, Bill Jordan, set up a little charity shop that spawned 2 charities, Care for the Wild, which I work for, and Born 3, that has done huge work around the world in Africa and Britain to protect wildlife. That's what makes us special. That's what makes us best of British. You keep standing tall. You are better than anyone who tells you you're wrong. We will win this battle.
Thank you, Dominic. A lot of information there for you to assimilate, but lots of good information for you to use. Dominic's absolutely right. You know, we have problems that are not of our making. We have people, and I always believed we lived in a democracy. I actually believe I now live in an elected dictatorship, not in a democracy. I'd like to just ask one more person to speak, if I may, and that's Jeff Hayden, who's the director of Badger Trust.
Morning. It is still just. I was told that the dress code was black and white with just a spurt of blood. And I'm representing respectable middle class. Badger Trust have always realised that if this cull ever did start, that the news would get around and a lot more people, and it is a ginormous number of more people, would start protesting, because up until now they couldn't really believe it was ever going to happen. I'm quite convinced that the future will look back on this time and see it as pivotal, when the history of England's what was green and pleasant land changed for the worse. Owen Paterson has already said he wants to go back to when farmers could just kill badgers without any law stopping them. I wonder how far he wants to go back. Do we send children up chimneys to clean them? Do we still allow women to have the vote? Which direction should we be going in? I think it's a national shame that Mr. Cameron's courage didn't extend to allowing a free vote in the House when the Badger Cull was debated. And perhaps the initials DC now stand for Democracy Compromised. I'll add my thanks to you all, and oh, that's fine. But I'll finish now. We'll have our walk. I know that we will not give in. Thank you.